Welcome to a new vision of reality, TSK for the 21st century, our new series on the time-space knowledge vision. TSK starts from the radical suggestion that deep, open-ended, sustained inquiry into time, space, and knowledge, as fundamental facets or elements of our being, can have a profoundly transformative impact on our ways of being and knowing in the world. Many in our time, as we are moving into the third decade of the 21st century, feel that we're caught up rather surprisingly in various crises of meaning and sense-making. And I've long felt that TSK is powerfully resonant with and relevant to the various integral, metamodern, and other communities attempting to address these crises. So I wanted to open up a series where we could explore TSK retrospectively, considering its origins and intentions, and prospectively, in light of what wisdom and ways of working it might offer us going forward. For the 11th episode of A New Vision of Reality, I'm happy to be joined by David Filippone, an experienced TSK practitioner, a writer and blogger, and the curator of the Center for Creative Inquiry Facebook page. Well, welcome, David. It's really great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Great to see you again.
Yes, it's been a while, but I'm really happy to have this series be an occasion for us to get together and talk again. And I've probably got a short list of a few people that I really wanted to talk to for this series, and you are definitely one of them, since we've been involved so early together in that journey. And I just want to say briefly at the very front of this that another person that I would have loved to have spoken to is Stephen Randall. And he recently passed away, and we weren't able to have a meeting prior to that. And, it was a sad loss for a lot of us. And I just want to, in this video, just give kind of formal respect and recognition and appreciation to him and the beautiful work that he's done, the beautiful, bright soul that he was. He was the landing pad for me and my family when I moved out to California to begin graduate school. And he was a TSK contact for me. And we lived at his house while I, got settled in California. And we did a lot of TSK practice together and some workshops. And it was really a delight to be with him. And I know that, you've had some interactions with him, but not probably as much as we did since we were living with him. But I just wanted to, since we won't be able to have him on, I wanted to just, give him that recognition.
Yes, it's a nice remembrance. And and I remember those days when you were living with him and corresponding with you, and how grateful you were for his presence and his allowing you to be there, and how happy you were. And I remember corresponding with him over various practices and his efforts to spread the TSK vision in his way. I was very grateful for his. He was always available to say, if I had a question, and he was just a great guy, and he will be missed.
Definitely. There was he was really very generous. When I moved out there, it was with me and my wife and our brand new baby and my sister-in-law. So we invaded his house, and then he had somebody, Fede, a guy from Italy, move in, who was working on doing an Italian translation of one of the TSK books, and Christina, a young woman from Eastern Europe who was also interested in TSK. So we had a little mini TSK community going on for a time there. And you were kind of, for me, a remote virtual TSK participant in that community at that time for me. Yeah.
You mentioned your son, and I remember him too from when you were living in Charlottesville, and I remember him when he was, like a foot long. As an infant, and and I'm from Philadelphia, so we might compare him to the length of a hoagie. Now he's about 6 hoagies long. He's
Exactly. And that's usually what he eats.
Funny.
Yeah. So I know some of your TSK origin story because I was kind of there with you at the beginning. We were both kind of getting rolling in it at the same time. But I wanted to just ask you if you could share a little bit about your spiritual journey prior to discovering TSK, and then, what kind of led to your involvement with TSK.
Well, sure. I guess I have to give a little history first. So my career was managing commercial real estate and large properties, 1 million square foot or more. And so I did that for about 30 years. And during that time, I was fairly successful at it. My wife, as you remember, my lovely wife, Patricia, we lived we struggled, she worked also. She was an executive secretary. She worked hard. I worked hard. We had a nice home, vacation home. We did okay. But underneath it all, I felt there was something missing, from all the striving to get ahead and this high pressure job. And I was on call for, 24/7. And so this hollow inside me, that this collecting of things and of experiences, and there was something more that I was missing. So I was searching for that, and I read all the mystics, and a lot of them. I don't want to say all of them, but I was online at in my free time, and I was reading. I think I was reading. I'm not sure. No, actually, I think I met you online first. That's how we met, at a Krishnamurti site, and I got very involved in reading Krishnamurti, and we became very friendly over a period of years and exchanged, I think, thousands of emails. and you got me into reading a lot of Jean Klein and various other Buddhist, including, I think, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who at that point in Charlottesville, you were living in one of his facilities, you and your lovely wife. And so I was always searching, and you ended up being my spiritual friend, and online, and we were like 3 states apart. So all we did was communicate, with, and rare. I think we met twice in Charlottesville. So we were always, you and I were, you were my lifeline to a spiritual life, kind of, and you were always suggesting books for me to read, and I was just hungry for them. And eventually, we went through A.H. Almaas and the Diamond Approach, and I read all of those books, and he was a student of Rinpoche. And at one point, we came across you came across TSK, and I think it was Knowledge of Time and Space was the first one, the most difficult one. And you said, hey, you got to read this. And so, I got that and poured over it. And, every paragraph was an explosion in my mind. And so then we got into all the other TSK books, and how fascinating that was. And then we also got into the Tibetan yogas of dream and sleep, and we were practicing those together, online, and experimenting with that. And I remember those days because they were just lovely. So much newness and discovery of what I was missing. Whatever it was I was missing, that was it. It was looking deeper into myself, and finding whatever depth was there. But eventually TSK is what took hold. It just, it's not like I was just following everything Rinpoche was saying. It's just that he would say something in the book and I would look to my own experience and it just resonated and resonated deeply. So it just kept me in tune with what he was saying. And I kept practicing. And then I realized I needed at some point, some years into that, after reading most of the books, I wanted personal instruction. And so luckily I found out that Jack Tranker, who was your first interview in this series, was giving online courses. And well, I signed up immediately, and he was been my personal teacher for more than 14 years, a little more anyway. And so that's been the history. So the question, how did you start the question?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was looking just for, what led to your interest in spirituality and how you got into TSK ultimately. And yeah, I recall that time also very well. It was a pretty magical period. Of course, I was living at a Tibetan lama's house, and that was very interesting and intense and beautiful time, and doing a lot of the dream yoga practice. But you were a really special connection and friend for me, because while I was involved with the Bon and Buddhist community there, you were a person who had a receptivity to a range of interests that were much broader than just the Buddhist focus. We had the Krishnamurti connection together and the Almas, and a whole constellation of interests that I really delighted in exploring and co-practicing with you, and some of our silly Dreamtime adventures.
Yeah, I remember those. I remember one time we decided we wanted to see if we could meet in our dreams. And I decided, since you were living in Charlottesville, I said, all right, so I'll meet you at 2 p.m. I figured I'd be asleep by that time. And I'll be sitting on the top of the stoplight at the crossroads between Route 29 and Rio Road. So that was I set my intent to be there before I would go to sleep, and see if I could astral plane and connect and be sitting up there waiting for you to meet me. We never really met up that way, but I don't know, strange things were happening, it seemed, during those periods.
Yeah. I was reflecting back on that, and I don't recall us having unique success with that, but I did feel like we had some periods of synchronicity and alignment that were really interesting, that maybe outside of our immediate control of, like, I'm going to be here and you're going to meet you. But nevertheless, there was some kind of like a deep, synchronistic resonance that was developing as we were practicing together. Looking back, now at your practice and your inquiries and engagements now, and do you see anything further back in time in your childhood that maybe anticipated or primed you for any of these kind of interests, any existential challenges or mystical type experiences, or just dreams or anything like that? Or did it really mostly emerge later for you?
No, that's an interesting tracking back for me. And I have come up with a number of things that looking back that I remembered, that things that when I was younger, who can I talk to about that? There's nobody. Does this happen to other people? And I could never talk about it with anybody, so I just let it go. And then years later, I'll give you an example. So just recently, I realized that this was a practice, apparently, and perhaps a Buddhist practice. I don't really know, because I'm not Buddhist, although some of the people I admire most are Buddhists. And I love the Buddhist philosophy, but I'm just, I hesitate to call myself a Buddhist. But so what, it's like, look at yourself in the mirror and just stare at yourself. And I did that. And I remember I just lost myself for a good 15 minutes. I think I was in college, and I don't know why I did it. I just looked at myself in the mirror, stood in front of the mirror, and all sense of me, identity, location was gone. All sense of history was gone. There was nothing. It was like I lost, it was blank. And I lost the blank for about 10 or 15 minutes. And when I came out of it, I was there looking, and I was just amazed. What just happened? I looked at my watch. I didn't understand it. So that was just a strange situation. And then I go back further, and I remember my mother as I was about 6 years old, and my mother was an artist. She loved to paint watercolors and acrylics, and she would go out, and she would take me with her as a 6-year-old, and we'd go out in some lovely locale, and she'd spread a blanket out and put me on it and give me a toy or something, and she'd set up her easel, and she would start to paint. And I remember telling me I was a lovely baby. I didn't cry, or I didn't. I would just observe. I would just be looking around, and that's. I'm an observer. That seems to be what I do. I do easily, and so there are other examples. I can mention other things. That I had something else in mind, but I can't think of it at the moment. The dreams. I remember talking to you about this. I remember when I was really young, 8 years old, maybe somewhere around that time, I had nightmares. I was afraid of the dark. I was dreaming that animals were coming to devour me, gorillas and wolves. I wouldn't necessarily call them night terrors, but I did have these nightmares. And I remember talking about this in my child's mind, remembering my dad telling me in general terms I might have been afraid of doing something in my waking life, and he said, David, you have to face your fears, because if you don't face them, they're just going to keep coming back. And in my child mind, I'm looking wide-eyed at him and observing and listening and taking it in. And when I went to sleep at night, I remembered this wolf was coming after me in my neighborhood, wow. In the Philadelphia neighborhood. So this big wolf with fierce eyes and venomous, just coming at me, and I seemed to be powerless to get away. And he got up real close, and I turned around and I faced him, and I said, put my arm out, and I said, if you come any closer, I'm going to wake up. And immediately he disappeared, and I woke up. And when I went, wow, I can control that. And so I never really had that nightmare or those kinds of nightmares again. So a lesson learned in a dream is a lesson learned in life. So I realized that facing your fears is something I could do. And that directly relates to edge of the future exercise. And of course, there's a psychological part that you and I have discussed about that, and my father and all that, but we don't have to go into that. But it's interesting how tracking back from today and looking back at history, you recognize these little points, and they're not necessarily major things, but they you see the seeds of future development.
Right. Yeah, I want to come back to and talk to you about the edge of the future exercise. I recall our early days together on the Krishnamurti forums and all those discussions. And Krishnamurti was quite formative for me in my own spiritual development. And I found a lot of, nourishment in his teachings and his presence. And I recall, also though, some of the forums were rather rancorous. There was a lot of people who used to take his style, which could sometimes be cutting and direct and abrupt, as kind of license or permission to do that to everybody else. So I remember there was sometimes tension on those Krishnamurti forums. And for me, getting involved with TSK and some of the small community that we were able to, for a lot of it was me and you just talking, but there was some small community we encountered, and there was not that kind of rancor or competition. There was more of just an interest in the inquiry and the exploration. Right. So I know that that's one thing that resonated with me, but I'm wondering for you, when you kind of started opening up the first TSK books and experimenting with it, what really stood out for you or attracted you about TSK, and was there anything in it that you were finding there that you hadn't really found elsewhere, or was it just its style of presentation, or what was involved there?
Well, back then I was chasing space, and I had no idea what time meant. It wasn't even into time, and I just thought I thought I knew. I was chasing Rigpa. And of course I was chasing my idea of it, or what if I ever did experience it, and I suspect I may have, but regardless, I was chasing the memory of it, and of course that's the trap. And we go chasing our memories, and that becomes the goal, and we're just spinning, chasing our tails, and locked out from it, and so space. So I was always looking for space, and then my idea of it, or what I thought my idea of it was, or I thought my experience of it was. And I began to realize that space was much more than my idea of it. And then discovering time and the importance of time, of Rinpoche's vision of time, how important that was, because you can't live your life in a void. And that's what I was trying to do. It was kind of perhaps an escape, but eventually I realized that, and I was doing a lot of meditation, meditating the way we used to meditate, choiceless awareness. And when I began to realize what Rinpoche was pointing to at the spark of life, the vitality of experience, the center of it as being time in space, time, space, and then space having a knowing quality. That just kind of opened things up for me. And I've been studying that, looking into that for, I don't know, the last 20 years, something like that, maybe more. I forget how long I was trying to think back, have we known each other for 20 years, or is it 25 years or what? But I don't know, long time.
I think about 25 years, probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. TSK has a number of books, about 6 books plus some side texts that are related in different ways and some commentaries and tons of practices.
Excuse me.
For you, are there any texts and practices that really stand out as especially impactful for you over the last 25 years?
Yeah. So let me just, before I say it, and remember that question in case I forget it.
Okay.
But before I say that, I want to say that I've studied all the TSK books, and I've read them more than once. And I consider these Rinpoche's secular books as just a wonderful teachings, just a gift to humanity, to my Western mind, a personal gift. And I consider TSK because I learned it first as the root text, if you will. But I love all his secular books, and including Revelations of Mind, Dimensions of Mind, Caring, and now Richard Dixie came out with Searcher Reaches Land's Limits, a 2-volume commentary on Revelations of Mind, just a magnification of Revelations of Mind. So, and they're all pointing to the same essence. You know, just as Buddhists study TSK, it's not a dogma. It's a way of opening experience. They study it alongside their Buddhist teachings. I find all the secular books, even though they're separate paths, and the teachers want to be very, they want to make that point that these are separate paths. You study them separately, but they all come from the same mind. And that Rinpoche's beautiful mind. And they all point to, you might say, the edge of the future. They all point to knowingness, recognizing knowingness in our experience, the point of cognition, the refresh rate, which, as Richard Dixie points out, that it happens, as researchers shows, it happens on average perhaps 8 times per second that we refresh. Another name would be witnessing at the point of cognition level, not the self level. The self comes in and says, now I understand, now I got it, and then the self thinks it's the witness, but that's not really witnessing. So they all point to that, and they all have at their root the TSK essence, which is inquiry, open inquiry. And so it all seems to point to the non-conceptual informing the conceptual. And that to me, that is the edge of the future exercise. That's the where you allow the future infinity to, not your ideas of the future, not your story of your what you anticipate will be the future. That's just taking the past and pushing it forward and projecting. But actually staying at the edge where the future comes to be, where it informs the present moment. Resting there is where all of these secular books seem to point towards. So the original question, if you haven't forgotten it, I have. So what was it?
Just if there were any particular books that really stand out for you out of the series that have been meaningful over the years, and core practices that you've really enjoyed.
Okay. So all those books, including TSK, and all the books that point me toward the present moment and the arising of knowingness, or the point of cognition, getting me there, so that just prior to the readout, which is not only discussed in TSK, but also a concept at Revelations of Mind, just before the readout, where the conceptual mind starts, where the subliminal knowing happens, and then the conceptual mind takes over and starts making meaning. Just there, the arising of knowing prior to the conceptual. To me, that's the edge of the future exercise, and I do it all the time. I sit out here on the porch, and I might be working on the computer here, and I'll look up at the trees, and the leaves will be whispering to me, and all of a sudden, there I am at the edge of the future, and or I'll be writing, and I'll be trying to think of what to say, and I look up, and in the looking up, it's not thought. It's whatever you had intended. You don't know what specifically you were going to say, because you haven't said it yet. It hasn't come to you yet. You just know somewhere it's going to come, and you wait for it, and it comes. But you didn't know in advance what form it was going to come, or how it was going to come, and what way it was going to present. But right there at that point, and sometimes I'm writing, and I'll say, I forget the writing. I just want to stay right there and dwell in that edge of the future, not knowing what knowing will present. So that's my favorite, I must say.
Yeah. What do you think really attracts you to that particular practice, or what do you find in it that fulfills you?
Well, it's instead of the way I ordinarily would, I'm thinking from concept to concept, and it's a kind of linear way of discovering meaning or making meaning, or understanding from concept to concept. And you start on that linear way, kind of flatlining, and you forget there's more to those moments that are passing by, and you miss the depth of that's available in each instant. All those 8 times per second refresh rates are happening, and you're flying right past them. You're going right over them. And what you're missing is you're missing your own depth and vitality of time, in TSK terms. You're missing the fullness of what life has to offer you, instant by instant. Once you realize that, for me, I begin to settle down and appreciate and become so grateful for being able to recognize the openness of the moment. And once I do that, it happens more frequently. And then so that my days are full of those depth of presence moments, the depth of being moments. So what I was missing all those days of those 30 years of my career, I have now. It's here, moment to moment.
Would you make any distinction between the instructions, familiar spiritual instructions of, be here now, where the focus is really on presence, and on the edge of the future? Is there any kind of subtle shading of difference or experience for you between, riding that frothy crest, as we've sometimes, talked about it, and the injunction to be here now, to be present?
Oh, yeah, I think you have to rephrase the question for me, because I thought I was just kind of answering it, but I must be missing something.
Yeah, for me, and maybe maybe I was slow in hearing what you said,
I
but
doubt that.
yeah, for me, what I was thinking about is, a lot of people from, Ram Dass to Eckhart Tolle and other people, they've always talked about be here now, be in the present. And TSK, one of the things I think Rinpoche famously said is be here now is a nice injunction, except nobody knows what be or here or now mean. Right. But there's a difference to me in the it's subtle, though. It's a very subtle difference in orientation between just being here now and dropping thoughts, and that injunction to meet the future as it comes, to sit at the edge of the future. And do you find, the idea of being here now and being at the future basically synonymous, or is there any kind of difference for you in orientation and experience?
Well, life is full of pain and suffering. I mean, there's always something happening that doesn't go according to plan, and things you don't account for, and loss of loved ones, for example. My lovely wife Patricia passed away about 8 years ago, and I miss her all the time. And of course, I'm at my age. There's a whole host of loved ones that have passed away, family members. So I miss them. So, and then there's physical pain, and there's psychological pain, and so when pain happens, the ordinary tendency, my ordinary tendency, is the knee-jerk reaction often is to think about it, be afraid of it, loop all kinds of stories about it. What am I going to do now? Oh my gosh, this hurts. How am I going to survive this? What's going to happen to me? Me. All that kind of building a tsunami in my mind around the whatever the point of pain is.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's not living at the present. That's kind of often living in the past, in a way, feeling the pain, but living the past. So when I catch myself doing that, I have to take a breath, for sure. If it's physical pain, I remember. I'll give you an example. So I had the cartilage in my knee. I tore it, and it was very painful. And I went to the doctors, or I was taken to the doctors, and had to have an MRI, and had to hold my knee in a position for 30, I think it was 30 or 35 minutes, in a very painful position. And so when they told me that, I went, "What are you nuts? I can't do that. It's killing me." And I know if any women who've been pregnant and had babies are going to listen to this and say, "Oh, you baby," try giving birth and see what that's like. But at the point, having never given birth, I was in pain, and running through my mind of this tsunami of, "Oh, I'm going to embarrass myself. How can I do this? I'll never last that long." And and at the same time, the pain is making me gasp for breath. I'm going, catching my breath. So, and then I realized, I just remembered TSK, and I just started, take a breath, breathe, focus on your breathing. And while I'm in there and the MRI thing going around, and I close my eyes and just breathe slowly. And in doing that, focusing on breathing, all those stories that were going around in my head dissipated, and space happened. more space was available for me to see that pain was there, but it was not a tsunami around it. There was all kinds of other things going on. There was my breathing. There was other things happening in my awareness, and pain was over here to the side somewhere. It wasn't nearly as pain. It was just a sensation. I had gotten that calm. And then and all of a sudden the attendant came and said, okay, time's up. And I thought I had another 15, 20 minutes to go.
Wow.
So you were asking what practical, I guess you didn't use the word practical, but can TSK practices be practical was what I was hearing. And so, yeah, I guess that was, being at the edge of the future. That's another edge of the future. You're introducing space, what not knowing, the dissipation or deconstructing of the conceptual, allowing the more spacious awareness to be there. Mm. So that's one example. Mm. It's like a gift. And I, anticipating our meeting, I remember that time that you lost your flutes, and I think it was months that you were without your flutes, and they were all wooden handmade flutes, and that you had loved to play and spent time, perhaps even meditating by playing with them, playing the sounds. And one day, like knowingness informing you, suddenly they appeared behind the bookcase, and I thought that was poetic, because it wasn't in the books; it was behind the books. So anyway, so that's a gift. Yeah. Knowing is a gift. Knowingness.
Yeah, beautifully put, and that's a really, I think powerful example, because pain causes us so much to just really focus in on it, and then it just magnifies. And yeah, one thing I was thinking about with that question about be here now and the future orientation, dwelling at the edge of the future, is that at least, sometimes as conventionally taught or practiced, the be here now kind of tells you to forget about the future and the past, either deny them or cut them off or just treat them as illusions. And there kind of sets up a subtle opposition between I need to be present and I need to cut off those past and future things.
Yeah.
Either they're intrusive or distracting or unreal. And with the edge of the future, it leaves it in there as a vital element, but it's a way that actually circulates you back into deeper presence through an allowing of an open, inchoate kind of future, in the arriving, the ever arriving. So yeah, I feel there's more of a almost lemniscate, figure eight allowing of the future, past, present intersection, and you're dwelling at that little meeting point in a way that doesn't set up the dichotomy.
Yeah. So in my TSK study groups, let me put it this way: in many of Jack Petranker's teaching classes, he often ends. In fact, I can't think of time he didn't do it, but he usually ends his classes. He might have a 6-week class here and another 6-week, but by the end of the final class, he ends up at the edge of the future. He's ending. He's pointing us toward not the conceptual future, but the future infinitive, the always arriving, not known, openness, the open source, not the past. And had a point. What? And so, anyway, so in my study groups, I'm always people conceptually understand what we're talking about in the future, but they're conceptualizing from their past understandings, and the open future that he's talking about, of course, is it's always arriving unknown, but the potential, full potential. And so I spent a lot of time. First of all, Rinpoche on page, I think it's 256 on the original TSK book, goes into the importance of recognizing knowingness. And I think before I started reading TSK, I was using space, the idea of space, or my idea of Rigpa as the source. But that, again, is just conceptualizing. For me, was a conceptualizing. So I'm always trying to point to the point of the future, to the edge of the future, and that not knowing aspect and the always arising, which is what all the secular books of Rinpoche is pointing to. It's the essence. It's the serene explosion, as he says.
Right. To me, something about the word revelation points to kind of the arriving of knowing from that indeterminate space. Yeah. And you've mentioned that book, Revelation of Mind and the practices associated with that. So for anyone watching this who maybe hasn't gotten into exploring those teachings, which, I understand are TSK friendly, even though independent. How would you characterize, what he's presenting, what he's doing in Revelations of Mind with the teachings and the practices associated with that?
Well, in TSK, understanding is the Revelations of Mind is pointing to what Rinpoche calls understanding, but with a capital U. It's not understanding through conceptualizing, reason or logic. It's not reason or logic. So in TSK terms, you might point to understanding as knowingness. Understanding is our knowledgeability, is our ability, is our knowing capacity. There's a way he's understanding with a capital U is that which allows us to see what we previously overlooked. I just love that phrase because it brings us back to the point of cognition or the edge of the future. And so, and an example of that is looking for a word, whether it's in me talking to you right now or writing. And I'm at the edge of the future trying to articulate something I don't quite know yet what it is, but it's almost there. That's understanding. And that understanding, that knowingness is available every moment. If we just allow it to inform our conceptual, our concepts. So Revelations of Mind uses as its meditation the regime of mind, or you might say the readout that TSK points to, and that you look at your concept, you meditate on your conceptualizations to understand them. And a good way to do that is to track back, just like we just did when you were asking me about my history, and I was talking about my childhood and what informed my adulthood. Understanding that, so understanding your reactivity. If you're quick to anger and you don't understand why, it's just a button somebody pushes and you just react. You need to understand that, and the way to understand it is not just it's not to conceptualize about it, but actually look into it calmly, allow knowingness to inform you, and you go back looking through your history. How did this happen? How did I? And eventually it takes you back often to your childhood and to your child's mind interpreting something and reacting in that way. And once you understand that and you see, oh my gosh, that's how that happened. That's my history of doing that. Oh gosh, this is it. It doesn't always just say it, that often you can anticipate your reactivity and it just smooths it out. Doesn't always happen for me. Sometimes I can have a rush to anger when I fumble something. I fumble the screwdriver, or I drop something, or I spill some water or coffee or something like that because I was careless, and I'm so angry with myself, and that kind of reactivity. But if you look at it quickly, Revelations of Mind teaches you to. Understanding will reveal through knowingness the source of it and dissipate it.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, we've mentioned a couple terms. TSK has a number of unique concepts or neologisms. There's the future infinitive we've been talking about, the concept of eknosis, universal unique, focal setting, happening, a lot of unusual concepts that or even some familiar concepts that are used in a new way, like logos or something like that. So are there any of those terms that have been meaningful for you? I think probably we've been talking about future infinitive, but yeah, anything that stands out as impactful for you of those unique concepts that TSK introduces?
Well, hypnosis is an important one. It's that, it relates to understanding. It relates to knowingness. It's knowing the whole, and it relates to the point of cognition, the refresh rate. It's the inward outward knowing, full knowing. It's open source knowing. Not sure what terms to use to describe it, but happened it is, for me, is always getting trapped in the story. It's trapped in the past. It's trapped in the telling.
Right. So it's kind of like, for happening, it's kind of whatever happened, it's the recurrence of the happened in the present as a kind of story loop. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Always chasing your tail.
Right.
Or too late to do it. You're so caught in the story, you've passed the point of cognition. You've missed it. You've missed that fullness of knowing, and you're going to keep missing them because you're you're behind the time.
Right. How does TSK engagement, practice and reading, and how does that show up for you in regular life? Is it like a daily routine, or weekly, or is it more spontaneous and situational?
But all of the above. But you have to understand, my daily life now is mm, has a great deal to do with TSK. I'm retired, so and not very mobile, and of course the pandemic kept me isolated to some degree because I was high risk, age and diabetic, that kind of thing. So, and my wife passed away, so I basically live alone. But I'm not lonely at all because I'm living TSK, you might say. I'm immersed in it by choice. I love to be immersed in TSK. It's always new for me, in the sense that I'm always inquiring, and often partake of the gift of the moment, the fullness that's available. Who knows how long you have. I'm very aware of impermanence, having lost so many loved ones, and how quickly the moments pass. But I'm very grateful to have been to be where I am at the moment, wherever that is.
Right. Well, one of those places is the lovely view behind you,
Yes.
which is, for those of us who know you and who are on some of the TSK blogs, we almost feel that we hang out with you in that little space because you have so many beautiful reflections from that meditative space that you've created there. And
I remember telling Jack once that if I ever wrote a book, I think I have the title would be View from the Porch.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's one thing I wanted to ask you about is, you've done a lot of really, I think, lovely writing and blogging and article creation, on TSK topics, and this porch has definitely been a good inspiration in that, at least a good holding space for that kind of work. And I
Right.
just was curious if you have any writing intentions, future writing projects or intentions for TSK Reflections.
Jack and Morgan from Center for Creative Inquiry have asked me to contribute to the forum, the Center for Creative Inquiry Forum, and I also curate the Center for Creative Inquiry Facebook page by posting things, that I've recently posted a couple of things that we've discussed today on those pages, and so they'd like me to continue to do that, and as a volunteer, I love to continue to do that. So I mean that's my. I can't think of anything better to do with my retirement time than to volunteer for the organization that spreads TSK and the secular books that of Rinpoche that I'm so grateful for and appreciate and love so much.
Yeah, thinking about all of the, I think, really in-depth engagement that you've been able to do with TSK teachings and practices, would you say that there have been any cycles or shifts in your experiences of time, space, and knowing over time? Have you noticed different ways or patterns of how they come to the fore for you, or just any ways that they've shifted in their manifestation of your experience?
Well, yeah. I mean, like night and day. I mean, we're from I would say a point of near ignorance, taking for granted time, space, and knowledge, to appreciating knowing, knowledge, time, I mean, as a limited, as a as a limited resource, let's say, and so, and I think that everything I've said today so far kind of points to that. I don't want to say awakening, but I certainly was pretty much asleep in terms of realizing the importance of that. There's more to me than just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about most people, but I suspect that most people think they are their thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and they are so much more.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really true. We in our infancy, we identify mostly with our bodies, and then with our emotions, and then a lot of us ultimately end up identifying with our thoughts, and that's where we sit for much of the rest of our lives. Right. And one thing, I don't want to embarrass you, but one thing I really appreciate about you is your humility around your own knowing and experience and understanding and embodiment of TSK, that I think most of us who are reading your contributions and blogs and everything, we can feel the transmission of the impact of TSK on you. But you always are very careful to say, oh, I'm no one special, I don't know that much. But it's still, I think, to me, to see the flowering of TSK in your life over the years has been a really wonderful thing.
Thank you. No, I'm just a dedicated student. Just a student.
Yeah, that's how I feel about myself as well, and a very appreciative one. And you've mentioned that word appreciation a few times, and that's a key idea in TSK. And I also know you as a appreciator of fine art and a painter yourself. And do you see any intersection between the kind of the spirit of TSK and its cultivation of appreciation and your work with art and the visual arts, and has there been any kind of influence or overlap there?
Sure. Well, in my younger days, as I said, my mother was an artist, and she instilled in me, I think, the appreciation of her artistry and her way of looking, her artist eye. She could see something. She could take a Polaroid. Back in those days, you click it, and you click the Polaroid camera, and the film would come out and develop within a minute, right before your eyes. But it wasn't real clear like today's. It was cloudy, and if you're doing a landscape you had to. You almost needed a magnifying glass to see fine detail. Somehow she saw it and painted these amazing details. Maybe she just came from knowing this, but so yes, I used to paint because she did. I used to paint watercolors. I don't do that anymore. I haven't done it in years. And I used to carve decoys, wood duck decoys, and paint them. And I used to do that. That was a lot of work, though. I mean, I sold a few I couldn't believe the amount of money that they paid for them, but but I didn't want to part with any of them. But so I still have a few, and I wouldn't part with them at all because I knew how much work at the time I put into them. But so with regard to, I often think about watercolors, and I think I've written about this. I know I've written about this. It's not the transition of pointing, there's a word I'm missing. I can't. That's a problem with age. I forget the words. But we move from point to point to point often, but ordinarily we have this point to point. So in painting a watercolor, you paint light backgrounds first, and then you move toward the current focus as the darker that you get and the more detailed you get, the more granularity you show. And the picture comes to be. But in the painting of the watercolor, I remember it's not, I would tell people, they must say, oh, it must be so relaxing for you to paint watercolor. No, it's not relaxing at all. It's a horrible thing because I'm so nervous about getting it. It has to be quick because the water's going to dry. And you have to do this first and that. And but once I get involved in it, you're engaged. You know that when you're in the flow, you're so engaged. You're in the moment, totally in the moment, and you were a moment previously. You were just doing this, and you were. And it was important to remember to get this brush stroke right and to get that point or that dot, and then you don't even think about it anymore. All of a sudden you lose that and you're just doing it. You're just doing it by in the flow, in the zone, and the painting then kind of paints itself. And in a way, that's that's like being in the moment in terms of TSK, being in the present. Being present to what you're doing instead of lost in the conceptualizing of it. So do I see it in art? Yeah, I mean, in that way, I do.
Right. Yeah. I find that both the kind of excruciating quality and the moments of flow can come up in writing as well. I think probably for any artistic form, but there's an edge where there's a struggling with the detail. I don't have the temporal limits that you do with the drying of the paint, but there's another kind of limit where you know that there's an idea burgeoning there, and if you don't act on it in the right way, you're going to lose that, right?
And I used to play musical instruments when I was younger. I started with the piano when I was a young boy, and then I picked up the guitar and used to play the guitar. And when I remember learning to play something, and you on a piano particularly, or even on the guitar, but you got to hit the notes correctly to be able to play it. You have to get the fingers to know what to do. And it's a lot of doing. It's like balancing on the bicycle, learning, then you get the balance right. The body knows you can play it, or you can ride the bicycle without worrying you're going to fall off.
Right.
And you become good at playing it. And it sounds like a song. And then you can get emotionally involved in it and play it without thinking about it, not thinking. It's just, it's happening. You're fully engaged, as I was just talking about. So that's I always think of TSK, and so it becomes second nature to me in what I'm doing. Sometimes I don't even think about that I'm doing TSK practice. I am the TSK practice,
I know you've done a number of retreats and classes over the years. I've had the pleasure of being at one or two retreats with you.
Yeah.
But
great fun.
Yeah, definitely it was. Can you kind of narrate the story of some of the retreats and classes that you've done? What are just, people can have an idea like what's offered and what kind of
well, I mean, I remember Ratnaling, what a beautiful place up in Sonoma County in California, not far from Odeon, like a mile and a half away, something. Excuse me. It just so, and Jack Petranker would run the retreats, and you and some of the, I'm trying to think of Michael, who you've previously interviewed, Michael Gray. I don't know if you know Hayward Fox, Carolyn Sherwood, Ken McKeon, who you've interviewed, Ron Purser, who you've interviewed, and I mean, there's others that for the life of me I can't remember that have been there and just participated at Jack's retreat, and I just remember them being almost sacred in that they were just so caring and sharing and open communication, communing, and in the best sense of the word, sharing. And I have pictures in the flashing pictures are going into my mind. In terms of what we were learning at the time, of course, we were practicing, and we would, Jack would have us run through some practices, and we would focus on them and then discuss what came up for us, and then, further go deeper into it as we could and read text. And in some cases, what we would conduct the practice for the others present. Each one of us had a turn doing that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I just remember I've made lifelong friends, and who I'm still in contact with today, because one of the things, and growing up, there was nobody I could talk to about these deep personal spiritual matters. My family wasn't interested. No one I knew in school or my friends cared about it. And this is something I hear from many of the people in my TSK groups. They're so happy to have the TSK group to be able to come together, and it's almost like a retreat. In fact, they are little mini retreats where we meet weekly and discuss whatever TSK related issues comes up or practices. It's a safe space of trust and caring. And I've made new friends from those meetings. And so if there's a way to spread the TSK vision, those Zoom meetings certainly seem to help.
Definitely. I think that's a silver lining of the horrible pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
At least we've been driven online to communal meetings, and I think a lot new sharing is happening through that. New virtual tribes forming. Did you ever do the TSK teacher training?
Yeah. 2 years. You were there part of the time, I recall.
I was, yeah, and I was wondering if you went through and finished the whole thing, and how
I did. How was it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was wonderful. It was hard work, but it was. I remember. It was 2 years. We would. Jack had laid out a course of instruction that was. It was like going to college for 2 years, or going to graduate school for 2 years. It was we would do student teaching each, and had to write papers, and so, did that make me a teacher? Well, I mean, I went through the teacher's courses in the class. I have a certificate, but I'm still not a teacher. I'm just a student. I admire the teachers that teach. I mean, I have family members that are teachers. One's an astrophysicist out of Caltech. He teaches down there. Another one's just written a book a couple of years ago, art history. Another one has a couple of master's degrees and teaches high schools about to retire. So, I mean, I love teachers. I just don't. If when I was growing up and they asked me what I wanted to do, teaching wasn't one of the things that I would.
Yeah, it wasn't for me for a long time until I think I read some Krishnamurti books when he was talking about kind of the sacredness of teaching and the importance of really helping children and others to face their own conditioning and win some freedom from.
I love those ideas, and I agree with all those ideas. The only thing I don't care for is the label of the authoritarian label that comes with teacher. I love to discuss the issues as we're doing here now with my TSK groups, and practice with them and talk through TSK points or revelations of minds or whatever that comes up, and in that way help, and in some way perhaps help understand the others understand, and I gain understanding from them. I just don't want to be the authority.
Yeah, understandably. And to me, there's a spirit in there that resonates somewhat with David Bohm's work around his inquiry groups, his inquiry and dialogue groups, where there are people who step into facilitation roles, but there's no interest in anyone being the authoritative knowledge transmitter. It's more you alchemically work with the space to allow knowingness to emerge and meaning to be shared, with groups.
Exactly. And that's that the two TSK groups that I'm with now are examples of that.
Right.
We used to start with agendas because you usually need a plan of some sort to start out with, but as people become familiar with each other, and it becomes a safe space, trusting and of trust between each other, and we all care about what's going on in each other's lives, then you don't really need an agenda. People bring to the meeting what's important to them, and we discuss it, and TSK terms or revelations of mind or caring or whatever the secular books are, and even some of the Buddhist books. But yes, I agree with you.
Thinking on our original meeting around the Krishnamurti teachings and David Bohm, one of the things that Krishnamurti and David Bohm both focused on a lot was the fragmentation of knowledge and the kind of the breakdown in meaning making and in sharing meaning, the ways that we become polarized or trapped in our formulations and tend to stifle insight, generative emergent insight or engagement with the world. So how would you frame those concerns from a TSK perspective, and how do you see TSK contributing to that?
Well, the beauty of TSK is, for me, is that at its essence is the open inquiry. So if we're ordinarily ruled by our concepts and our opinions, and we hold them so, I don't know, sacrosanct, or our opinions we are our opinions, and we identify with them, and you have an opposite opinion, and all of a sudden you become an enemy. I mean, we see so much of that going on today, and it's such a shame. TSK has the power to open up those conceptualizations, those opinions, because they're just made out of space. They're air. They're like clouds that we cling to. identify with. Anyway, so yeah, those teaching or TSK teachings and all the secular teachings of Rinpoche has to offer are very valuable in opening up that kind of myopic perspective.
I agree. Yeah, it's been very impactful for me in terms of just the way I'm able to relate to my own thinking. As the bumper sticker says, don't believe everything you think. And TSK has been very helpful in opening my space around that.
Right. That's a good point. Discovering TSK gave me the language, the tools, the terms to be able to describe my experience to myself in order to bring it up and understand it in a way to open it for me that I didn't have before. So that's to me, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, well, I think you've put that beautifully, and I've really enjoyed the conversation with you today. Is there anything that we didn't get into or touch on relative to TSK and practice that you wanted to mention?
Probably there's about 9 books worth of stuff we could have talked about, but I just enjoyed this very much. It was so great to see you again, to see your friendly, compassionate face again. I miss you. At some point we'll get to see each other again, and I'll get to enjoy some of that great food you eat that you're always taking pictures of. So
it's a date. I want to do that for sure.
So thank you so much. This has been great. Peace.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for all the work and the volunteering that you're doing for CCI and for helping to kind of just give new, fresh voice to TSK and practice. And I really appreciated all you've been doing.
Well, to that end, thank you for doing this series of giving voices to TSK and spreading the vision. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Take care.
Yes, you too.